The following minicast features Laura Flanders in conversation with Thomas Hanna, Research Director at the Democracy Collaborative and author of Our Commonwealth, The Return of Public Ownership in the United States. They discuss public ownership, from banks and parking meters to water and electrical supplies. There's more of it in the U.S. than you might think. Who's afraid of it, and what are they afraid of?
Would the U.S. economy, which, as we know, has its problems, work better if some industries and services were nationalized? It has been so long that we have been sold the merits of private over anything resembling public ownership that it is almost shocking to read that in one of the most conservative states in the Union, Nebraska, every single resident and business receives electricity from a publicly owned utility, co-op, or public power district. Partly as a result, Nebraskans pay one of the lowest rates in the nation. So what would be the pros and cons of following Nebraska? That's just one of the questions Thomas Hanna asks in his new book, Our Commonwealth, The Return of Public Ownership in the United States. It's out now. Hanna is Research Director at the Democracy Collaborative, our colleagues. Thomas, welcome to the program. I think this is the first time you're appearing live and in person in a chair in the studio. I'm glad to have you.
It is. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I used both terms there because people have heard both. They've heard nationalizing, bad. Public ownership, different. But nationalizing brings up all sorts of stereotypes, sort of Stalin's shipyards and Maggie Thatcher's coal mines and, I don't know, the Postal Service, which I happen to love. That's some of what you're trying to address in this book, right? What are the myths?
Yeah, exactly. So the book essentially has three premises. First and foremost, that in the United States, public ownership is much more prevalent and resilient than most people think. You know, we think of the United States as sort of being the beating heart of free market capitalism, but in reality, we actually have quite a robust tradition of public ownership. The second, that's despite 40 years or so of neoliberal propaganda that has been really effective. You know, there's not actually any consensus in the empirical or theoretical literature about whether or not public ownership is inherently less efficient than private ownership.
Wait a minute, there is not? I mean, we have been told, it has been drilled into us by every media outlet in the land for 3 decades at least that public is less efficient than private. It's not true?
Yeah, exactly. You know, the Margaret Thatcher, there's no alternative, or, you know, government is the problem, not the solution. But I went into this and I studied dozens and dozens of empirical and theoretical literature and studies. And I actually found people, these academics, they'd go into their studies thinking that, oh, I'm going to find that private is more efficient than public, and coming out and saying things like, oh, to my surprise, the publicly owned entity is as efficient or more efficient than the privately owned entity.
So what kind of public entities are we talking about, Nebraska aside?
Yeah, so in the United States, we have around 2,000 publicly owned electric utilities. About 90% of all people in the United States get their water from a publicly owned water utility. That's like significantly higher than in many countries, especially England, which you may know, where they've privatized their water system and have had terrible, terrible results as a result of it. You know, there's about, we have sovereign wealth funds in many Western states. These are very large publicly owned funds. So Alaska, for instance, many people know, they have a very large publicly owned fund that takes a cut of oil and mineral extraction, and they use it to provide essentially a basic income to everyone in the state. In Texas, there's a huge fund, the Texas Permanent School Fund. It's like a $40 billion fund, and they take about $1 billion in dividends every year, and they give it to every public school district in Texas.
So just to back up, I mean, just so that people really get what we're talking about. For one thing, you're talking about public ownership, a little bit different from national. Alaska's model isn't the model that we have in New York. Mm-hmm. It is the model they have in Alaska. That means Alaskans, own the oil resources as a group?
Yeah, so they take a cut of the profits or from the extraction, and then they invest it into stocks, bonds, real estate, other things. So they do own a variety of assets through their essentially taxation of the fossil fuel extraction. In Texas, the Texas Permanent School Fund does something similar with extraction, but also directly owns 2 million acres of land in the state. So a public fund owns 2 million acres of property.
And what do you think is the best argument that you're hearing around public ownership as opposed to private?
Yes.
Is it that it makes more money? Is it that it's just kind of more accountable, or all of the above?
Well, for me, the most important thing about public ownership is that it's a flexible ownership form. Unlike private ownership, and especially corporate ownership, it is not constrained by shareholder value, quarterly returns, having to turn a profit. Public ownership is really what you want to make of it. It's something, it reflects the community's priorities in many ways. And I'm not going to sit here and say that publicly owned enterprises in the United States are paragons of transparency and accountability and democratic participation, but they can be. They can be democratized. And that goes back to my third premise of the book, is that we don't want to go back to the top-down forms of public ownership of the past, the state-owned enterprises, the nationalizations, as you say. We want to really democratize publicly owned enterprises. We want to put them back in the hands of the people, back in the hands of the workers, the consumers.
So how do you do that? Are there any models?
Yeah, there are great models all across the world, and some here in the United States as well. For instance, Paris remunicipalized its water utility about 10 years ago. In the process of that, they also set up an observatory, which is to encourage civic participation, and the board of the water utility takes representatives from the observatory. It has environmental representatives, it has worker representatives, it has city councilors on it, so it's a multi-stakeholder board. Is won awards for its transparency, for its accountability, and so on. In Costa Rica, there's a bank, Banco Popular, which has a 290-person General Assembly, which is drawn from workers all over the country. And that General Assembly elects 4 members of the board, and the government appoints 3 members of the board. And it goes through a popular planning process in the country, and as a result, it's become one of the most ecologically friendly and most sustainable lenders in Central America.
So it's all a matter of how it's done, in the same way that a co-op kind of can be. You can either have kind of top-down, publicly owned, or community-influenced, transparent, publicly owned. I've got 2 questions. One is, what needs to be done, or what happens to lead to the better of those 2 possible outcomes? And what do you think people could be doing in this country right now?
Yeah, so people, communities, activists need to realize and understand that publicly owned enterprises are a tremendous asset and a resource for change, for systemic change. So, for instance, in Nebraska, you mentioned earlier, 2 or 3 renewable energy activists, climate activists, have recently run for the board of the Omaha Public Power District on a platform of converting it away from its heavy coal usage to more renewable and wind power. So they've taken hold of that strategy, and if you can get a control of it, if you can democratize a publicly owned enterprise, you can move it in a direction of affecting real change. We've seen in the public banking movement here in the United States, there's tremendous possibilities of what you can do if you get control of capital at the local level in terms of a public bank.
So in the minute that we have left, I want you to address people's fear of government, because, government control over data, government influence, surveillance over our lives. People tend to be wanting less government rather than more. Take Facebook, for example. A lot of people have been talking recently, given the abuses of Facebook, that it should be nationalized. It should be taken over. But it did give me pause when I saw Steve Bannon was in favor.
Yeah, so I think this gets to the democratization question. So we don't want to centralize power and control in the hands of the state and an unaccountable bureaucracy. We want to really give it back to the people in a more decentralized and distributed form. So we have to put in place the mechanisms to allow for that. So more transparency, more accountability, more flexibility, more participation rather than less. A lot of people in the liberal center, when they look at publicly owned enterprises, they don't necessarily want to privatize them, but they want them to be arm's-length corporations. They want them to act like private corporations, nimble in the marketplace. I think that's the wrong approach. We really want to embed democracy within these enterprises and bring them back towards the people.
All right. Thomas Hanna's book is out now, Our Commonwealth, The Return of Public Ownership in the United States. Thanks for doing the work, and thanks for bringing us the story.
Thank you so much for having me.
Keep up with us. You can find out more about the work of the Democracy Collaborative through the link at our website. Thanks.
For more, watch or take a listen to our recent episode, Revolution at the Federal Reserve, featuring former Goldman Sachs manager Nomi Prinz and Thomas Hanna in conversation about the way that central bankers steer world development and how things could be different. Support the Laura Flanders Show. Become a member. Go to lauraflanders.org/donate.